Hello folks, and welcome back to the refurbishment and build of this Fokker DR1. I'm going to attempt to recreate the effect of rib taping on this model, but before I do so, a little word or two about my philosophy on scale modelling in general. What I've always tried to do in any sort of modelling that I do, whether it's model railways or model boats, or in this case model aircraft, is to create the feel of the real thing. And it's not for me about creating an absolute replica of a part of the real thing or the whole thing in total. It's about creating texture. And what do I mean by texture? Well, I found that, for example, when it came to model railways, that the most effective and realistic model railways were the ones that paid attention to the depth of the texture of the landscape by altering the colour and varying the colour, but also by altering and varying the structure of that landscape. And what struck me with this wing, once it had been covered, and obviously triplane, there are three of them, is that once the paint finish is going to be added to this, it is essentially going to lack texture. And when you see the wing taping, the rib taping on models, it sort of catches your eye in a very subtle way. And I wanted to reproduce that. Now, as I've said, this isn't an absolute scale model. For example, these riblets weren't actually used. It was a plywood sheet that came across here in a dogtooth pattern. But I wanted to create a little bit more feel to this wing, which I believe it's a flare design, which had basically the main ribs, and there were no riblets. So short of actually adding the plywood front sheet, I've created a similar effect, I hope, by adding these riblets. Now, when it came to how to do the rib taping, there are lots of ideas out there and lots of different techniques have been used. Before I tell you how I'm going to tackle it, a word about what it actually is. Now, on this wing, it's covered in dressmaking nylon, and it's drum tight. Somebody did comment that they'd used some nylon and they'd put the finger straight through it. Well, I've got the making of a drum kit here. That's not the case with this stuff. When I've actually covered it, on the real thing, there would be nothing to stop the fabric from lifting from the ribs. So what they would do is they'd lay a cloth over each rib to protect the fabric that was going to cover it. Then they would put the fabric. Put the fabric on and stitch through at regular intervals to make sure that this fabric didn't pull away from the aerofoil. Now, how do you do that on a model? Well, I have seen some really ingenious ideas and I've tried thinking through the logic of them, and I think I've come up with a simpler solution, because one of my views of some of the finished items that I've seen is it's major overkill and it goes over the top in terms of the effect you're trying to achieve. Now, there are no DR1s left. The only two surviving aircraft were destroyed in a Berlin museum during the Second World War. So anything that you see now is a reproduction. But when I had a search through the internet and looked for photographs of DR1s, when I was looking for schemes, it's very, very difficult to see evidence of the stitching at all. That's how subtle it is. So I didn't want to go over the top. And I've had a little bit of a trail on the underside here, which I'm about to show you. And that's what I've come up with. And I hope you agree with me that that's quite a subtle effect, but an effective one. And obviously once it's painted the sort of sky blue stroke turquoise on the underside, that'll blend in even more, but it will be visible. And what I want to show you is how I've actually gone about doing that. So we'll pause for a second and then we'll get started showing you how I've done it. Let's have a look at the tools of the trade then. So to simulate the taping that goes over the ribs, I'm going to use some masking tape, and this is some tape I bought off the internet, and it basically, in my view, this is like a Tamiya copy. So it's a very thin masking tape specifically made for modelling. Must put my teeth in this morning. So there we go, that's the first stage. I then have some glue to represent the stitching, an applicator which came from one of the chain coffee stores. I've got a bundle of them when I visited. Cutting wheel that I've shown before. Really cool bit of kit this, and I'll demonstrate how I'm going to use it. And then to simulate the tape over the top, I'm using micropore, which is a surgical tape, and it just gives to me the right effect. It's very subtle, it's not over the top. I think if I used a Solatex or an Oratex to put over the top, it would be over scale. It would be too thick and would look over the top. So I've used this to achieve the effect you see there. And the final thing, to seal it all in so it doesn't go anywhere, isn't pickled onions. It's a jar here of some what's called banana oil sometimes, but it's basically a non-shrinking dope which will seal the tape to the surface and bind it to the nylon finish that I'm not nylon, sorry, the polyester finish that I've achieved there with the wing. So there we go. That's what I'm going to use. That's what we're going to look at. Let's show you the first stage. Well, the first thing to do is to apply this tape, and it comes in all kinds of thicknesses, and this is the one that I think looks the best on this particular model. It's a low tack tape, and you simply apply it to the rib, in this case to the capping strip. I'll just roughly cut it off there, and I'll do the remaining two. Didn't go long enough there, so I'll take it over the top. And we'll do a one here to simulate this last rib. Actually, I'm going to lift that and move it across a little. So that tape's on. Okay, now the next thing is I'm going to apply some glue to simulate the stitching itself. Now, I believe that this glue is an aliphatic glue, which means it's slightly thicker. I think Mod Podge would work really well. PVA glue may be a little bit thin and it might spread too much. So, but only experimentation will show whether that works. I'm cutting the tape approximately where I think it should end. Now, the next thing is what spacing did the stitching occur? Now, this depends very much on your prototype, and I believe that for World War I aircraft, German World War I aircraft, it was stitched at approximately 4-inch gaps. So it actually put the stitching in the wrong location, and that's why I hesitated. Watch what happens next. Well, the eagle-eyed amongst you may have noticed that I've taken these strips off and started again, and that's because when I looked at the spacing of the stitching, it appeared a little too close. And there's a lot of debate about this, and as I've already said, there are no surviving original DR1s, but I think this spacing is more realistic in my eyes anyway, and that is I've spaced them at 3/4 of an inch between stitches, and this is how I do it. So taking the coffee stirrer from one of your well-known coffee chains, works out to be perfect for the capping strip widths. In fact, if I'd known about it, I might have used these for capping strips. Never mind. I've cut the end off square, and I've put a dollop of the white glue, which I think is an aliphatic glue, onto a suitable item from the kitchen. And what I'm going to do is get into a rhythm of applying, and all you simply do is dip the dibbler in and then dip it onto the tape. So I'll just show you me doing that for a little bit for your entertainment, and then I'll crack on, get it all done, and in about an hour's time we'll come back and I'll show you the next stage. So I've got this so I can hold it. It's a dab, glue, just like that. Of course, being a liquid, it settles down. Flattens out a little. It's quite therapeutic, actually. Don't you find lots of modelling's therapeutic? You get into a sort of zen mind state. You can happily repeat the same task again and again. Perhaps that's how people tolerate very repetitive jobs. They sort of get into a state of zen. Just a thought. No chance of getting into zen when I was doing my job. I was a teacher for 30 plus years. There was nothing zen about 30 kids coming into the classroom every day and then changing every hour. I enjoyed it. Well, I enjoyed 20 of the 30, which is not a bad run, is it? There we go, nearly done, to replace the ones that I've just pulled off. And I'll carry on doing this until they're all done, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what I do next. Quite visible when they're white, aren't they? But they'll tone down obviously when they dry out. That's the glue dry, and as you can see, well, all but dry, you can see here the impression of where the stitch marks will be. Excuse the background noise, that's the dishwasher on. I'll show you what I'm going to do now with the micro pour. There we go. So I'll just zoom in a little closer. So I'll take some of this out and I'm going to put it on the cutting board, and I'll use the lines that are on the board. There you go. Now I want the width of this to be wider than the tape that's on, and I'm just going to work on that there. We use the cutting wheel, and then we lift it off. There we go. And if we swivel round to I'll do this one here. And push the tape down. Now I'm looking there, I may actually go a little bit wider than that. In fact, I think I will. I'll take this one off. And it doesn't affect the glue underneath because that's set now. So I'll go a little bit wider. And then I'll set that as the sort of datum point for all the ones that are to come. So swivel round again. I'm going to cut along this line here. They really are very cool, these blades, cutters. There's no chance of a tear. There we go. Let's swivel it around again and see what this looks like. That's better. I've got an overlap. Apply it like that. Now what I'll do is I'll trim this off and we'll apply some of the onion juice, no banana oil or non-shrinking dope, and that basically seals the tape on. May need a couple of coats. And yes, this does involve a little bit of extra work, but there's a lot of wing area on this, and if it's left and there's no effort to break it up a little, I think it will look very bland. There we go. I'll apply that all the way down, and the last part of the video we'll come back and see what it looks like. And here we have it then. This is the final effect. I think it's very effective. It's suitably subtle. I don't think it's over the top at all, and once it's got a coat of paint on it, I think it'll look the business. So that's my approach. It's not the only one. I've used a similar approach years ago using glue to put rivets on the model boat. You'd be surprised how much relief you get from the glue. And if you look closely, I think that does look like stitching coming through. Anyway, I hope you found it useful. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed, why not do so? At the moment, the weather is horrendous here, but Sunday looks good and I hope to get flying. And if you can, have fun. If not, get creative. Bye now.